They laughed at him. A 14-year-old boy with torn sneakers held together by duct tape, hair that hadn't seen a proper cut in months, and clothes that carried the smell of cold nights spent under highway overpasses. He stood in the marble lobby of Sterling Global Industries, clutching a worn notebook against his chest like armor, claiming he could solve a problem that had stumped the world's most brilliant minds for 3 solid months. The executives thought it was a joke. The security guards thought he was delusional. The CEO thought he was just another street kid looking for a handout. But in exactly 57 seconds, he would silence a room full of millionaires and change everything they thought they knew about genius. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel Martinez pushed through the revolving doors of Sterling Global. His backpack, salvaged from a dumpster behind a school, contained everything he owned: that precious notebook, a broken pencil sharpener, 3 pens that still worked, and a photograph of his mother that he kept pressed between the pages of his mathematical theories. The security guard, Marcus, had seen plenty of kids try to get into the building before, usually looking for money, food, or just shelter from the rain, but this one was different. This one walked with purpose. "Hey, kid! Kid, you can't just walk in here," Marcus called out, his voice tired but not unkind. "This is a private building." Daniel stopped, turned, and looked Marcus directly in the eye. "I need to see someone in charge," he said quietly, but with determination. "About the Rossetti document." Marcus was surprised. In 8 years of working security for Sterling Global, he'd never heard a street kid mention that name. The what now? "Look, son, whatever you're selling, whatever you need, this isn't the place. There's a shelter 6 blocks down." But Daniel interrupted him. "I'm not looking for charity. I can read it. The document you've been stuck on, I can translate it." Other security guards began to notice the commotion. The marble lobby, usually filled with the quiet murmur of business conversations, grew silent as employees stopped to stare at the unusual scene unfolding. Marcus had been working security for Sterling Global for 8 years. He'd seen desperate people before, but something in this boy's eyes stopped him cold. It wasn't desperation. It was certainty. "Kid," Marcus said after a pause, "that document has had Harvard professors, MIT linguists, and cryptographers from the NSA scratching their heads for months. You're telling me you, a homeless kid?" "Yes." "I know how it sounds," Daniel replied, his voice growing stronger. That's when Sarah Chen, junior executive, happened to be walking through the lobby. She'd heard about the Rossetti document from the water cooler gossip, how it was costing the company millions in delayed contracts, how every expert they'd hired had come back empty-handed, how the CEO was starting to panic about the board meeting scheduled for that very afternoon. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" Sarah asked, approaching cautiously. Daniel turned to face her. "I can help your company. The document everyone's been trying to translate, I know what it says." Sarah looked skeptical but curious. That's impossible. We've had the best people." "Language isn't about credentials," Daniel said. "It's about patterns. And some patterns, you either see them or you don't." There was a long pause as Sarah studied the boy. She had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton, had worked her way up from intern to junior executive in just 3 years, and prided herself on recognizing talent. But this was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. Finally, Sarah made a decision. "Marcus, call upstairs. Tell them we might have an unconventional consultant." The 42nd floor boardroom of Sterling Global had hosted senators, foreign diplomats, and Fortune 500 CEOs. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city, and its mahogany table had witnessed deals worth billions, but it had never hosted anyone quite like Daniel Martinez. As Daniel entered, trailing behind Sarah with his patched jeans and oversized hoodie, the conversation stopped. 12 executives in $1,000 suits turned to stare at what looked like their worst nightmare, a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. "Sarah, what exactly is the meaning of this?" demanded Richard Sterling, the CEO, a commanding man in his mid-50s. "We have the board meeting in 2 hours, and we still have no solution to—" "Mr. Sterling," Sarah interrupted, "this young man claims he can translate the Rossetti document." Silence. Then scattered chuckles filled the room. "You're joking, right? Please tell me you're joking," said Jennifer Walsh, the VP of Operations. "Sarah, this is a $15 million problem," added Michael Torres, head of international relations. "We've had teams from Oxford, Cambridge, the Smithsonian." Daniel spoke quietly but clearly. 15-year-old Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone. Age doesn't determine ability. The room fell completely silent. Richard Sterling's voice was slow and dangerous. "So you're comparing yourself to one of history's greatest linguists? You think you're the next Champollion?" "I think I'm someone who can read your document," Daniel replied, "if you'll let me." The Rossetti document had arrived 3 months earlier, part of an inheritance claim that could unlock a massive European real estate portfolio for Sterling Global. Written in what appeared to be a dialect mixing medieval Latin, early Italian, and symbolic notation that defied conventional linguistic analysis, it had become the company's white whale. Every day it remained untranslated. Sterling Global lost potential millions in development opportunities. The board was asking questions. Competitors were circling. Richard Sterling's reputation was on the line. Dr. Elizabeth Crenshaw, the chief linguist they'd hired as a consultant, spoke up. "Young man, I have a PhD from Harvard in comparative linguistics. I speak 12 languages fluently, and I've spent the last 96 days working on this document. What makes you think—" Daniel looked directly at her. "Because you're thinking like an academic. This wasn't written by an academic." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. After a long pause, Richard Sterling made his decision. "Fine. You want your shot? Here it is. But when you fail, and you will fail, I want you escorted out immediately. And Sarah, we'll be having a conversation about judgment." The Rossetti document was brought out like a sacred relic, encased in protective glass, photographed from every angle. Daniel was given a high-resolution printout, but he barely glanced at it before pulling out his own notebook. The executives expected a show. They expected drama, long pauses, maybe some cryptic muttering. What they got was a boy who simply started writing, as naturally as if he were doing homework. "What's he doing?" whispered David Kim, the CFO. "He's not even looking at the document half the time." "Probably just buying time," Jennifer Walsh whispered back, trying to figure out how to make a graceful exit. But Daniel wasn't buying time. In his mind, the document was already beginning to unfold like a flower. The mixed languages weren't confusion. They were intentional. The symbolic notation wasn't random. It was a cipher, but not a mathematical one. It was emotional. He recognized the pattern because he'd seen it before, in his mother's research. "Doctor." Daniel looked up briefly. "Did anyone consider that this might not be a standard legal document?" "What do you mean?" asked Dr. Crenshaw. "The linguistic mixing. It's not random. It follows patterns consistent with psychological distress. Whoever wrote this was hiding something from someone." Michael Torres scoffed. "Now you're a psychologist, too." Daniel returned to his writing. "No, but my mother was." And there it was, the first glimpse of the story behind the boy. But Daniel didn't elaborate. He simply kept writing, his pencil moving with increasing confidence across the page. Richard Sterling checked his watch. "You have 10 minutes before I call security." Daniel didn't look up. "I'll need 5. In the history of Sterling Global, no one had ever asked for less time to solve a bigger problem. The room watched in fascination as Daniel's pencil filled line after line with what looked like a combination of translation and interpretation. And then, exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds after he'd started, he stopped. "It's finished," Daniel said, setting down his pencil. The silence was deafening. "That's it?" Jennifer Walsh asked. "That's your big solution?" Daniel slid the notebook across the table. "The document is a modified will, but it's also a confession. The writer, Giuseppe Rossetti, wasn't just leaving property to his heirs. He was leaving evidence." Dr. Crenshaw picked up the notebook skeptically. "Evidence of what?" "Corporate fraud," Daniel explained. "The reason the language is so mixed is because he was scared of being discovered while he wrote it. He used his childhood dialect mixed with legal Latin, then added symbolic markers that would only make sense to his family. He wasn't just writing a will. He was exposing a conspiracy that involved—" Daniel paused, looking directly at Richard Sterling. "Several major international corporations, including one previous iteration of Sterling Global." The room went dead silent. Dr. Crenshaw began reading intensely. Wait, this actually makes sense. The grammatical structures, the symbolic logic. How did you—" Dr. Elizabeth Crenshaw had spent her entire career studying dead languages and ancient texts. She could read Sumerian, decode medieval manuscript marginalia, and translate Byzantine legal documents. But in 30 years of professional linguistics, she had never seen anything like what she was reading in that boy's notebook. It wasn't just a translation. It was an interpretation that revealed layers of meaning she hadn't even known existed. "He's right," she said, standing slowly. This is flawless. The document isn't just about inheritance. It's about stolen artwork, forged documents, bribes paid to Italian officials in the 1940s. Giuseppe Rossetti was documenting decades of art theft that happened during World War II. "That's impossible," Michael Torres protested. "We've had teams of people." Dr. Crenshaw interrupted him. "I've never seen analysis this sophisticated. This isn't just translation, this is linguistic archaeology. He's reading between languages, understanding cultural context, psychological subtext. How?" All eyes turned to Daniel. "How did you do this?" Richard Sterling asked, his voice tight with emotion. Daniel answered quietly, "Because I understand what it's like to have something important to say and no one willing to listen." And in that moment, the room full of millionaires realized they were looking at something they had never encountered before. Not just intelligence, but wisdom born from experience they couldn't buy, couldn't hire, couldn't replicate. But how does a homeless 14-year-old develop skills that stump Harvard professors? Daniel's story began 7 years earlier, in a small apartment filled with books and the sound of his mother's voice reading in languages from around the world. Dr. Isabella Martinez was a professor at the local community college, specializing in trauma linguistics, the study of how crisis affects language development. She brought her work home, not because she had to, but because she wanted her son to understand that language was more than words. It was the key to understanding the human heart. "Daniel, listen to this," she would say, showing him a letter from a refugee child. "This is a letter mixing Arabic with broken English. But see here, she's creating her own grammar, her own rules. When people are scared, when they're desperate, language becomes fluid, creative, beautiful." 7-year-old Daniel would ask, "Why doesn't she just speak one language, Mama?" "Because sometimes one language isn't enough to hold all our feelings," Isabella would answer. Isabella taught Daniel that language was alive, that it changed when people were in pain, that it revealed secrets when you knew how to listen. She taught him Italian from her grandmother, Latin from her academic work, and the art of seeing patterns that others missed. But when Daniel was 9, everything changed. The apartment fire that took his mother also took everything they had built together. The insurance money was tied up in legal battles. The extended family couldn't take in another mouth to feed. Daniel found himself in the system, then out of the system, then on the streets with nothing but his notebook and the voices of a dozen languages echoing in his memory. For 3 years, Daniel survived by translating for immigrants at the courthouse, helping business owners read documents they couldn't understand, earning just enough for food by using the gift his mother had given him. But he never stopped learning. Public library computers gave him access to linguistic databases. Discarded textbooks from university dumpsters filled his notebook with new theories. And always, he remembered his mother's words. Language isn't about what people say. It's about what they can't say. The Rossetti document wasn't just a puzzle to be solved. It was a human being crying out across centuries, just like Daniel cried out every day in a city that barely saw him. He understood Giuseppe Rossetti's fear, his desperation, his need to hide the truth in plain sight. Because he lived it. Back in the boardroom, the revelation of Daniel's translation had changed everything. The Rossetti document wasn't just about property rights. It was about justice. And Sterling Global wasn't just looking at a business opportunity. They were looking at their own history. Richard Sterling stood slowly, his voice heavy with emotion. All this time, we've been judging you by your appearance, your age, your circumstances. I was wrong. We were all wrong. He paused, then continued. Daniel, I don't know your full story, but I know talent when I see it. Sterling Global would like to offer you a full scholarship, any school you choose, any program you want. We'll also set up a position for you here as a consulting linguist with a salary that will ensure you never have to sleep on the streets again. The room waited for the boy to jump at the offer, to show the kind of desperate gratitude they expected from someone in his situation, but Daniel's response surprised them once more. That's very generous, Mr. Sterling, Daniel said, looking down at his notebook. But I didn't come here for money or job offers. What did you come for? Asked Sarah Chen. Daniel looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I came here because I had something to say, and I needed someone to listen. For 3 years, I've been trying to prove that intelligence doesn't have a dress code, that wisdom doesn't require a diploma, that genius can come from the most unexpected places. I just wanted someone to believe me. After a long silence, Dr. Crenshaw asked, And you've proven all of that. But Daniel, what happens now? Now I accept Mr. Sterling's offer, Daniel replied. Not because I need it, but because I can use it to help other kids like me. Kids who have important things to say, but no one willing to listen. It started with Jennifer Walsh. The VP who had laughed first stood up first, her hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. Then Dr. Crenshaw joined her, then Michael Torres, then one by one, every person in that boardroom rose to their feet. Daniel looked around the room, at faces that had changed from mockery to respect, from dismissal to admiration, from closed minds to opened hearts. And for the first time in 3 years, he smiled. Really smiled. Standing before them, Daniel addressed the room. My mother used to say that the most beautiful words in any language are, I believe you. Thank you for finally saying them. That day, Sterling Global didn't just solve the Rossetti document mystery. They learned something worth more than any contract, more valuable than any deal. That greatness isn't found in corner offices or Ivy League degrees. It's found in the hearts of those who refuse to give up, who see possibilities where others see problems, who find hope in the darkest places. Daniel Martinez walked into that building as a homeless boy with a crazy idea. He walked out as a reminder that we are all capable of extraordinary things if only someone is willing to listen. Never underestimate a person because of where they come from. The world's greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unlikely hearts. And sometimes, just sometimes, all it takes is 57 seconds to change everything. Never underestimate a person because of where they come from. The world's greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unlikely hearts. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we share powerful stories of hope, resilience, and the day everything changed.